travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Dialogue with Clement Manyathela.
It's not just another roundtable discussion.
Let's walk the talk on 702.
All right, so on our Thursday Dialogue today, we're looking at the scourge of youth online gambling. And if you're a parent out there, you need to listen up because I think this is quite concerning and may get worse. According to the National Gambling Board, gambling participation among young people in this country has been steadily increasing and is being driven largely by the ease of access to gambling platforms through mobile services. And it's this accessibility that's made it easier for minors to engage in gambling activities despite legal restrictions prohibiting anyone under the age of 18 from participating, right? Because young people, these are the people that are particularly vulnerable to the risks associated with gambling because they lack maturity at that age and they've got limited financial literacy, and yet you've got many that still manage to find ways to gamble online. And I think that raises serious concerns about the effectiveness of current safeguards and just even generally enforcement measures. News 24 has been reporting this week that South African teens are becoming addicted to sports betting from as young as 14. So, parents, what are we doing about this? We're told that most of these students are from private and former Model C schools. What are we doing about it? Are we being vigilant? Are we checking out if our children are buying things? Are we asking them where they're getting money from? This is a social ill, and I think we need to deal with the problem before it becomes a bigger crisis, because online gambling companies are also beginning to target young people and not just your grant recipients and other vulnerable groups. So please let me know what your observation has been in as far as online gambling around young people is concerned. You can call us on 011-883-0702. The WhatsApp line is 072-702-1702. Bernadette Wicks is a journalist with News 24 who's joining us on the line. I'm going to start with Bernadette, and then I'm going to bring in the Federation of Governing Bodies for South African Schools, because they've raised some concerns as well. I will bring in the South African Responsible Gambling Foundation. I'll bring in the Democratic Alliance in Parliament as well, because they've been trying to push some legislation that can help us deal with this crisis. Bernadette, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning. Hi, Bernadette, can you hear us? All right, let me put Bernadette back to the producers. There's something clearly wrong with that line. But we're going to get Bernadette. I just want her to lay the foundation for us because she's been working on this story at News 24. And I want us to understand from what she was able to gather, how big of a crisis is this and what are the schools, the kind of schools that have been identified here before I bring in the other stakeholders. Let's try that line again with Bernadette. Bernadette, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfect. We can hear you. So from your report, how prevalent is sport and online betting among teens? What have you gathered?
Well, incredibly prevalent. And it was, I must say, terribly surprising for me to find out that this was such a big trend. But we spoke to high school students and teenagers from around the country, schools in Gauteng, schools in the Eastern Cape, and they all spoke about this as though it's very commonplace. They told us this is a very popular trend, and that they've been doing it, many of them, in fact, with the permission of their parents. So it did emerge that it's very prevalent, and it's not just concentrated to one province. It seems to really be a nationwide thing that's happening at the moment.
So how early are these teens starting to use these platforms?
Well, when it comes to these platforms, the teens that we spoke to told us that from as young as 14 they've been using them. But we must also remember that when we talk about underage gambling, when we talk about illegal underage gambling, that there's a wide variety of different forms that it takes. So I think my understanding is what's happening is that, in fact, even younger, they're starting playing with things like dice and cards, and that's almost desensitizing them to it. And so when they get a little bit older and they have access to these online platforms, that's where they're going.
Sure. And parents, are they aware of this behavior?
Well, I certainly can't say all parents would be aware of it, and I'm sure there are many parents who, if they were aware of it, would be upset. But we did speak to a number of teens who, of course, you need an ID or an ID number at the very least to sign up for an account with these platforms. And what they told us is they either just use an older friend or older cousin or older siblings, or they use their parents, and that often they ask their parents permission. Can I use your ID for this purpose? And their moms and dads say, yes, that's fine. We spoke to one kid who said he had bought his mom a fridge with his winnings. So I think that what's happening actually is that parents are not necessarily viewing this as much of a problem as it can potentially be. Perhaps those who are finding that their children are doing this without their knowledge, they might think, oh, they're naughty, they need to be punished. But I think that there's kind of a lack of acknowledgement of just how addictive, just how dangerous this can be in the long run. And the fact that kids need help if they've been doing this for a prolonged period.
Yeah, my goodness, this is quite concerning. Bernadette Wicks, thank you for making time for us. She is a journalist with News 24. I thought we should just begin with her to lay the foundation. She's been reporting this week on News 24 about this because she spoke to these young people, and it's quite a serious one. Have you seen this as a crisis, as a problem among your teens, in your community, in your schools? Teachers listening to us now, is this something you've picked up? And what do you think we can do to deal with it? 011-883-0702 is the number you can dial there. The WhatsApp line is 072-702-1702. Dr. Johan van der Merwe is the Deputy CEO at the Federation of Governing Bodies for South African Schools, joining us via Zoom. Dr. van der Merwe, thank you for joining this chat. Good morning.
Good morning, and good morning to all of the listeners, and thank you for having me this morning.
Thank you. We also have Sibongile Simelane-Quntana, who is the Executive Director of the South African Responsible Gambling Foundation. Sibongile, thanks for your time as well. Hi.
Hi, Clement. Good morning. Good morning to my panelists, and thank you for having us this morning.
Thank you. Lastly, we've got Toby Chance, the DA spokesperson on trade, industry, and competition. Toby, thank you for your time as well.
Thank you, Clement.
Yeah, Dr. van der Merwe, what's the state of online gambling from what you've been able to gather as the Federation of Governing Bodies for South African Schools? How prevalent is this really in schools?
Yes, well, I think it has become a growing concern. We've noted it amongst our FETSA's members. Gambling among learners is becoming a bigger problem because how easily it is accessible and how accessible it has become. In the past, you had to physically go to a casino or a betting shop, but today gambling is literally in our learners' pockets. With a smartphone and a little bit of data, we know that our learners can access gambling websites or even gambling games, games with feature-like gambling feature or like features, and often without age checks. And on top of that, we know that the way that gambling is marketed, it's very flashy. Sports betting is tied to football, rugby, all of those types of sports that has become very attractive. And then obviously the promise of quick money, and that's very appealing to our young learners. And it has become a growing concern in our schools, not just private schools, but public schools as well. And I think the biggest concern is that learners don't yet have the maturity to understand the consequences, and they very quickly fall into a pattern of chasing losses and borrowing money, lying to their parents, and then ultimately also neglecting schoolwork. Yeah.
So, Sibongile, is it a surprise that this is more prevalent among boys? Do we have accurate statistics on adolescents gambling?
Clement, we do actually, and boys are more prone to actually gamble more than girls. But I think one of the biggest issues that we need to address is not only about gambling, but we also have what we call gamification. I think Ms. van der Merwe, Dr. van der Merwe, actually touched about the games. So you've got games that our kids play on their smartphones and their iPads that mimic gambling. And from that then trend, it becomes a learned behavior. So from that, we then see the prevalence or the increase in number of people or learners that want to actually to gamble.
So how seriously then?
And in terms of the schools, it's very serious, Clement. I'll tell you why. We've got a schools program that we actually do, which is called Taking Risks Wisely, where we go to all the schools across the country trying to create awareness about, the potential harmful effects of gambling. So the stories that have been told by Bernadette are actually stories that we have had before, where learners, they take devices of their parents and register accounts under the names of their parents. Sure. Remember, in terms of our laws, they are not supposed to gamble. So what they do is they learn the behavior, either if their parents are gambling, so that's going to be a learned behavior, or from peer pressure from school, they will then use the devices of their parents to register their account because they can't register those accounts themselves. Now, what tends to happen is that it starts as an innocent activity and then it becomes a problem. We have had to intervene in the number of schools around Hammanskraal, actually Gauteng. You've heard in the news, I think last year, when learners fought and then they stabbed each other because of gambling in school. So it's quite a serious a issue that we are faced with as a country. And again, which means that we need to make sure that we strengthen our regulations so that we limit the exposure of our kids from gambling activities.
Yeah, and Toby, speaking of regulations, I mean, the shift from physical gambling establishments to online platforms comes with regulatory challenges, but we've got that National Gambling Amendment Act that was passed in 2008, but it's never been enacted. So what current legislation do we rely on now, and when was it passed? Is it strong enough also to try and avert this from becoming a bigger crisis?
Thanks, Clement. I think that Sibongile alluded to the problem. It's not just children under 18s. It's actually a wider social issue, which relates to people who are becoming more and more addicted to gambling. And the numbers are quite staggering. Over R1 trillion a year or last year was spent on gambling of one sort or another, by far the majority of which was sports betting. And you're right, the legislation is very out of date. The National Gambling Act of 2004 does make protection of minors important to any gambling operator that's licensed. And the 2008 Act attempted to legalize what was called interactive gambling, but it's never been promulgated, as you pointed out. And that's a real problem, because since then there's been an explosion in online gambling. And unfortunately, parents are just as complicit in this as the children, as was pointed out by Juané. Kids get hold of their devices and they can register illegally using their parents' identity. So there are huge loopholes in the regulatory framework, not just in the regulations, but also in the ways in which gambling companies are sort of essentially getting away with things which under the radar, because we don't have any regulations which regulate not just online gambling, but things like advertising. I mean, every corner you drive down these days, you see a billboard advertising some gambling site or other, sports games, the lot. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. There is work in the pipeline, but we can chat about that a bit later if you want.
Yeah, maybe let's get into that now about the work, because I'm just thinking about the legislative vacuum that this brings when it comes to sports and online gambling.
It's concerning because the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition came to the Portfolio Committee 2 weeks ago with their legislative priorities. And it was surprising that gambling legislation was not one of them. So what we are having to do now, we, as in the Democratic Alliance, we've tabled, we're introducing a bill called the Remote Gambling Bill, which aims to fill the vacuum in the legislation And we've consulted widely. We published the bill last October, and we've received submissions from a wide variety of stakeholders, lawyers, gambling operators, bookmakers. And it's a process that we're now undertaking to look at those submissions and draw the conclusions that we'll then have to bring to the committee.
Yeah.
But of course, the committee has to then establish a program which puts this bill onto the program, and it is yet to be actually tabled in Parliament. But it's certainly something which is a top priority for the DA.
Dr. van der Merwe, a lot of this betting, it appears to be happening in class and, of course, on school property. Do we need to start a conversation about schools and stricter cell phone policies? And how is that going to assist? Because at the end of the day, I mean, the kids could still, when they step out of the school premises, they can still, have access to their phones and then get onto these platforms. So what measures can we look at here to try and deal with it from the education and the school's perspective?
Yes, thanks, Clement. Yeah, well, I think, first of all, it's understandable that parents and schools feel worried when we see these behaviors, especially when it starts at these young ages. But when we talk about the school's role, I think it's important just to understand and clearly realize that it is the parents that are the primary guardians of their children's behavior. And even though the school can play a supporting role through discipline and through education, we must never totally absolve and take away the responsibility that actually vests with the parents. So the school's responsibility would, as you have clearly pointed out, be to create and maintain a safe and disciplined environment through their policies. But the focus of the school is the learning and the development of the child. So we should never lose that focus of us and should not lose sight of that being the responsibility of the school. But it is important that schools must have clear codes of conduct, they must have firm policies, and that would also include the cell phone use of learners. Learners must clearly know what is acceptable behavior and what isn't. So if gambling behavior were to happen at school or during a school on a school device, the school has a duty to act according to its rules, whether that means taking disciplinary measures or to refer the specific learner to counseling, because we know that this can become an addiction. It's actually more of a social problem, so therefore counseling is important. But it must be important that schools cannot monitor what happens in the learner's private lives or at home, but the learner can reinforce values. They can discourage gambling, but it cannot ultimately take over the role of monitoring and controlling the child's personal choices outside of the school. That responsibility ultimately rests with the parents.
And we can't preach that louder for the parents to be more vigilant and take that responsibility seriously. What else do you think the parents can do here, Dr. van der Merwe, in taking that responsibility to try and prevent and guard against the scourge?
Well, parents are the ones that buy the smartphones, they pay for the data and they allow access. I think very importantly is that parents must take the time to talk to their children about the dangers of gambling and other risky online behavior. Also, there are excellent tools and apps available that parents can use to monitor or even block certain sites and their apps on the different devices that the children use. So very much the parents must take up that responsibility. And I think also beyond the technology, parents need to create an open and a trusting relationship with their children, where the children can feel that they can talk about these types of issues. And parents should also set clear rules at home and model responsible behavior themselves. I think this isn't about spying on children, but it's about guiding and protecting them. And I think that's where the parents should play a very, very clear role.
Yeah, it's 26 minutes now after 11 o'clock. I'd like to take some calls, some WhatsApps as well as we continue this conversation to hear from some of our listeners. 011-883-0702 is the number to dial. WhatsApps on 072-702-1702.
Clement, what an interesting topic. You know, I was watching a show whereby a child, I think the child was 16 years old, and then he won almost R1 million from the gaming show. The mom was so happy. She was even going to buy a house with that money. But you could see the child, he's so drained. Like the mom doesn't see the dangers. As long as she's receiving the money from the child, it's all good. But I could see the child, because when they were touring one of the houses, he just fell asleep in the couch because he's so tired. The mom says, no, he's gaming internationally with international people, so he sleeps late. She doesn't see the dangers. That is the problem. You could see the child is not well, but because mommy is getting money, she can now afford a house, a nice house. That's all that matters to parents. So, and it's very sad.
Hi, Clement. It's Vincent here in the West End, but I'm currently at home in Mpumalanga, KwaNdebele, Almasdresi. Look, man, my take on the issue of gambling, I think the gambling companies have made it easy for us to access their websites, to access their apps, and also to be able to purchase these vouchers through our bank apps. So by so doing, they knew what they were doing, and they're making life easy for us, even to just, you can buy that a voucher for gambling and load it on your app and blow it away. So it being easy to access, I think it's one of the reasons why people are going into gambling in this huge number.
Hi Clement, I'm a mother to a 9-year-old, and one of these days we're sitting watching primetime TV. It must have been about 7:30 in the evening. And my child says to me, Betway ad comes up on TV, and I think they were showing the game with the airplane, the aviator game, where you make so much money in such little time. And my baby says to me, oh, look, mommy, that looks like such a cool game. I can make so much money off of it. And I was so taken aback, because now I must explain the concept of gambling to him and why that is not a game that you want to play. But it looks cool, it looks enticing, it looks exciting. I think that gambling ads should be banned altogether, especially on primetime TV. But I hate the amount of exposure that not only us as adults have, but also our children. They are overly exposed to gambling.
Yeah, this is really getting out of control. Yeah, and I wonder, and I'll get Sibongile to respond to this, I wonder how seriously these companies as well are taking underage gambling, and what's the solution? Must we make it difficult to access? Because part of the problem is that accessibility has made it easier for minors to engage in gambling activities, despite the legal restrictions prohibiting anyone under the age of 18 from participating. We'll continue this conversation after the latest in Eyewitness News headlines. It's 11:30.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Merwe, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Dialogue with Clement Manyathela.
It's not just another roundtable discussion.
Let's walk the talk on 702.
25 minutes before 12 o'clock on our Thursday Dialogue. Today we are talking about the scourge of youth online gambling. There are people as young as 14 who are addicted to sports betting. And I think as parents, we need to do something about this. Schools, we need to pay attention to this because gambling is addictive. It's a social ill. And if we are going to sleep on this, we're going to wake up one day when the problem is much bigger. I've got Dr. van der Merwe, who is the Deputy CEO at the Federation of Governing Bodies for South African Schools. We've got Sibongile Simelane-Quntana, who's the Executive Director of the South African Responsible Gambling Foundation, and Toby, the DA spokesperson on trade, industry and competition, who have been chatting to us this hour about this crisis and what we need to do to deal with it. I do have your calls and WhatsApps that are coming through. I'll come to them in a moment. Sibongile, I just want us to look at now the responsibility on the part of the companies, these gambling companies. How seriously are these companies taking underage gambling?
I think their responsibility, Clement, starts with them abiding with the laws and regulations of the country, what they do. The laws are very clear that minors are not allowed to gamble. So they do that, and they know that should they allow or be known to have allowed underage people to gamble, they can lose their license. So they have it's got serious repercussions for them to allow minors to gamble, and they don't do that. Now, how serious are they taking that responsibility? They take it very seriously, but I believe that as a country, we could step a little bit up, in terms of responsible gambling and minor protection. We all have been lamenting the fact that minors, they use their parents' devices to gamble. We've got technologies that can actually use algorithm to actually understand the person that is sitting behind the device. Now, if we want to protect our kids from gambling exposure, I believe that we need to actually put more checks and balances so that we actually prevent them from gambling. But the most important first stop is us limiting the exposure, the physical exposure towards advertising. Soccer matches on TV, gambling is there, it's advertised. Now, we need stricter norms and standards to be put in place so that we prevent our kids from seeing gambling in the first place. You've got sponsorships that sponsor minor leagues at school by the gambling operators. And we need to make sure that we actually, because remember the kids, they associate the brand with something exciting.
Yeah.
Now, perhaps let's limit sponsorship of minor leagues, especially school children, and try to focus on something else. We are not saying they must not support kids, but I think because kids, they've got limited, or schools, they've got limited finances. And this is where the gap comes in. And maybe we need to look at some other places where we can get money to fund the schools league in terms of soccer, not to rely on betting companies, because we are trying to protect the minors from gambling exposure. But how do we do that if the brand associated with gambling is constantly at their faces?
Yeah.
So it's difficult. But I believe that in terms of the law, they are abiding by the laws. And what do they do? For instance, Hollywood's Bet, through their Hollywood Foundation, they actually undertake taking risks wisely campaigns with our team. So they go to school just to say, stop gambling, or understand what are the consequences of gambling. But again, Clement, I think this is a touch and go, because like I'm saying, when we go on these taking risks wisely or public awareness campaigns with the brand that is associated with a certain and a specific product, which message is most likely to sound louder? It's not the message of saying that be aware about the dangers of gambling. The kids associate certain messages with certain brands, and that brings in the excitement. But I think we need to stress the responsibility of parents. Parents cannot delegate the responsibility of parenting to somebody else. Microsoft has put in measures for parents to make sure that in terms of the games that parents purchases, they actually monitor what is happening. Parents need to understand what is on their children's devices, the time that they spend. I mean, you've got apps that can actually limit the kids' exposure. Parents must do that. Limit how much time your kids spend on a device. Limit what games that they download, because if in so doing you are protecting them from actually downloading apps that they should not be downloading in the first place. If your child takes your phone, be interested in what they are doing with your phone. Don't let them or allow them to just disappear with your phone because they download. Remember, some of our, like if you look at iOS, it's linked to your bank account, so you don't even at times need permission for anyone to actually, not to request the thing. The password. For instance, my kids, they know my password to my iPhone. So if they take the phone and download games, they can simply just, if you don't have a facial recognition, they can just use that passkey and download games. So we need to not delegate the responsibility of parenting as parents. Understand the ramifications of our kids being exposed to devices. Let's limit them. Let's be interested in what they are doing. In so doing, we are actually assisting the law, preventing minors from gambling.
Yeah. And Toby, the limit to exposure to advertising, do you think that's one of the ways to deal with this?
Yes, I do. But I want to pick up on what Sibongile said about technology. And technology has advanced in leaps and bounds in the last few years, particularly artificial intelligence, which I think can be used much more effectively in identity verification, not just at the time of registering on a site, but actually when you're using it. So the KYC, the know your customer, the biometrics and so on, and the AI following somebody as they're playing, these things can be used more effectively than they are currently being used to cut off access to people who are either minors or also excluded persons, people who voluntarily decided that they don't want to use online gambling. Then as far as the exposure and advertising is concerned, yes, I think that there's huge opportunities to tighten things up. I mean, if we look at things like tobacco and cigarette advertising and alcohol advertising, these are substances which have been banned for certain age groups, and that has led to changes in the advertising regulations. And I think that this is something that we have to look at more closely. For example, if we look at the sports betting scene, there is this whistle-to-whistle suggestion that's saying that, during a game, there shouldn't be any advertising by sports betting companies. There are suggestions that, that these sports betting companies should not be able to advertise during certain times of the day, when youngsters probably won't be watching TV or engaging in social media activities. So a greater conversation also needs to be had between the banks and the cell phone companies. So, for example, removing on-ramps from banking apps onto betting platforms. These are the sorts of things that can be partially legislated, but also have to be agreed as a code of conduct, a voluntary code of conduct by all licensed operators in the industry.
Yeah. All right, 17 minutes now before 12 o'clock.
The Dialogue with Clement Manyathela.
It's not just another roundtable discussion.
Let's walk the talk on 702.
All right, I want to take some of your calls and WhatsApp voice notes now. Let's start with Francesca, who is a parliamentary research officer at Rise Mzansi. Francesca, thank you so much for joining this conversation. I imagine as Rise Mzansi, you guys have also proposed some interventions to address this.
Oh, definitely. Thank you for having me today. So our main priority at this moment is gambling advertising and the regulations pertaining it. So we desperately need some legislative and regulatory updates. But the main thing at the moment is regulations, because it's something that can be passed quite easily in comparison to new laws, and our regulations desperately need to be updated. To that end, we need to limit gambling advertising that exposes minors. And I mean, in this sense, there are several different ways of interventions. There's limiting advertisements on television programs, which needs to be enforced more strictly. There's limitations on physical advertisements near schools and institutions and places where children might visit. But there's also a conversation that one has to have about the developing landscape of gambling advertising. So that pertains to social media, the use of targeted ads which companies can use, influencers who receive sponsorships from gambling advertisers or from gambling and sports betting companies. And in that sense, they also promote this as a valid form of income, which it is not. that's sort of the main thing on that side. And then we also we are advocating for a strengthening in the enforcement and especially the regulatory bodies that we have that should be overseeing and sort of keeping an eye on this matter. And in that regard, the National Gambling Policy Council, which is the highest authority and meant to sort of at least make sure that provincial and national policies and regulations are integrated. They haven't sat since 2018, and I mean that's before we saw the explosion in online gambling and betting. The National Gambling Board itself hasn't had a functional board since 2014, which is over 10 years ago, which once again is before all of these explosive changes happened. And there's no way that one can, first of all, really update these regulations effectively or enforce them without these bodies being functional. So we've called upon the Minister on several occasions to update us on the progress of reconstituting these bodies, but also to strengthen the enforcement of the regulations. And I mean, to that end, the National Gambling Board have also highlighted, or the Minister highlighted a few weeks ago, that the National Gambling Board have identified advertisers that are not, that's advertising is breaking these rules. But it's not really clear whether any real tangible consequences have followed from these identified violations.
Yeah, Francisco,
if I could just quickly come in
yes,
there,
please, go ahead.
Just quickly on the National Gambling Policy Council, she's quite right, but it is actually sitting next week, the first time in probably 7 or 8 years. And it's very important that, it's representing not just the National Gambling Board, but also all the provincial gambling licensors. So we're going to be very interested to see what the outcome of that meeting is.
Yeah, really looking forward to that and what it will produce. Here's some WhatsApp voice notes that have come through.
I had an interesting discussion with a young man the other day, Clement, where I was listening to his interaction with his parents. And I said to him, sometimes it seems to me that you want to be smarter than your parents. That was the basis of the discussion. And then he made this startling comment. I say startling because it is startling. He says, no, they're wiser than me in most things. But when it comes to electronics and comes to phones, I'm much smarter than them. They don't know phones and electronics and the apps as much as I know them, or to the extent that I know them, he said. And that's alarming because your child knows that you don't know. And he knows how he's going to circumvent what he's trying to do behind your back. So it's not easy to say the parents must police it. The children understand this technology much better than the parents.
Yeah, Dr. van der Merwe, that's a fair point there, right? Because, some kids are just more advanced in as far as their knowledge about these phones and technology. So they're able to even hide, these gambling sites so that parents won't even see them. So it also becomes a tricky thing for parents to provide effective oversight.
Yes, no, it does. I know we know we live in a technological era where learners completely understand the technology, whilst your older generation might not completely be aware of exactly how it works and how to enforce and use specific tools that they have available to address these types of issues. And I think that's where our schools can play a big role. We want to see our schools advocate and speak to the parents to help the parents identify what the types of issues are, what is available to parents to try and help and address what we know that learners are currently doing and facing. So I think advocating and enabling our parents to understand and to realize what they can do to ensure that the children aren't being harmed, that's quite important.
Yeah, and just still with you, Dr. van der Merwe, do you think that schools could do more to educate their students, these learners, about the dangers of gambling?
Well, I think I've had that question in the past, whether schools should look at gambling awareness programs. I think while that might be very helpful, I don't think that should be a standard practice, but it might be useful if you know that it is an issue in your school. Invite an external speaker of an NGO or a gambling expert to come talk to the learners and to speak to the problem that we're currently facing in the community. I think schools should focus on equipping learners with strong life skills and values. That's the one thing I think that's been neglected in our schools. But the values should be the focus. We must teach our learners to think critically, to practice self-control, and to make good decisions. To help them avoid these types of harmful behaviors, not just gambling, but as that's the topic today, that will help as well. So rather than formal gambling programs, I think a school should really aim to reinforce the kind of values that guide learners in all areas of life. And that's where our schools can play a very big role.
Yeah. Let me read some messages and get your responses, Sibongile and Toby, as well, to some of the suggestions, but also inputs from some of our listeners. Let's start with the voice note and I'll read some text as well.
I don't understand why they're able to advertise gambling. I thought that years ago it was stopped. Same with, obviously the cigarettes, etc. It's like allowing a drug pusher to have free access to your kids. And, glamorize it. It's absolutely shocking. And that's, it should be dealt with, in a legal manner. But parents must just stop it. It is so addictive and it's so destructive. And we're talking about kids. And, the other thing is that, I saw last night an hour of sport on SABC2, where it was like the whole team, from the trainers to the bookies, actually giving advice on the Durban July. And every 10 minutes there were adverts from the sports betting. I mean, that's crazy. Hope you can do something to stop the destruction of our young people's lives.
Yeah, something has got to be done. On the WhatsApp line, Rapula says, "Hi Clement, I have a colleague who is in debt due to gambling through her phone. She is still young and I don't know how to help her. She's always on her phone. I have a chance, I have to share with her my lunch because she has no money at all." And Sibongile, I don't know, maybe if you can respond to this one for people who know their loved ones, friends, colleagues, who are struggling with gambling, who are young and they want to assist. How can they assist? I'll come back to you in a moment to respond to that. Another one says, Clement, it's true, this gambling thing of kids in schools is a big problem. What I want to know though from your guests is, I'm not sure it's relevant to them, but the kids also do trading a lot. Does it also have age restrictions? These kids have a lot of money in these trade accounts. I'm worried. They said it's extra income to help their parents. And then another person says, Clement and the team, the kids are more technologically advanced than us. We may block them, but they have a way around technology. I'm just so tired of my child and the phone. Another one says, Clement, good morning to you and the amazing team and guests there. On the issue of young kids gambling, my son was a victim and he was helping the other guys to gamble because they saw he's good at it. I would like to assist I'd like to assist Mam Sibongile in the Responsible Gambling Board. I'm a graffiti artist and I own over 200 walls nationally, and I would like to use these walls to drive the message of underage gambling and the dangers of it. I would like to do an awareness campaign throughout our wall billboards and at schools, doing awareness campaign using graffiti. I would like to offer my skills for free to uplift our communities. Please put me in contact with her if possible. This is incredible. Thank you so much for sending us this message. I will put you in contact with Sibongile. Sibongile, yeah, you can come in.
Okay, Clement, if anyone listening has a relative, a friend, a child that is actually has a gambling problem or a gambling addiction, we actually provide free treatment and counseling. They can contact us on 0800 006 008, or they can send us a WhatsApp on 076 675 0710. We do also provide treatment and counseling for minors. We've got a social services department or unit that deals with minors. It's headed by social workers. So we provide treatment of any minors that are actually addicted to gambling. But I also just want to make parents aware. I think we are stressing more about gambling. We are not talking much about gamification. We need to be aware. Our kids, they use Sims and Roblox, and those are actually very addictive games. So even if your child is actually addicted to gaming, we are able to assist, even though it's not physical cash that our kids get, it's actually tokens. And from those tokens, they then, develop a taste to actually say that maybe I can create physical cash. But what also is important is that we've got something called loot boxes. These games, when our kids play, they actually have messages that pop up, and some of those messages, they're actually gambling advertising, not by South African operators, by international operators. Now, we actually have a huge loophole where even international operators that are not necessarily registered or regulated by South Africa, they are actually operating within our borders. And I'm sure Toby can actually attest to this. You find them on social media, and I'm not even sure, Clement, how can I explain that? We not only have porous borders, physical borders, we also have online problem with operators that are not regulated in South Africa.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So the messages that are being shared also on the WhatsApp line of how much money people have lost due to this online gambling, just staggering. Toby, your last words here?
Yeah, I think that there's a huge tension here, Clement, between the operators' desire to make money, make profits, and their social responsibility, which is undeniable. They do have it. But obviously the impulse to get out there and persuade people to use their programs and their systems and their games and so on is the impulse that drives their business. So the question for regulators is how to balance the social requirement to protect people on the one hand, but also to allow freedom to trade. That's the thing that I think the Policy Council has got to dwell on next week, and which the department and our committee has to also apply its mind to, because we can't just let the status quo prevail. We have to do something, and these contributions from my colleagues on this call and the people that are phoning in are very, very helpful to help us deliberate.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Johan van der Merwe, with the Federation of Governing Bodies for South African Schools, Sibongile Simelane-Quntana, who's with the South African Responsible Gambling Foundation, and Toby Chance, DA spokesperson for Trade, Industry and Competition. I appreciate you guiding us through this conversation on our Thursday dialogue.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.